Hey K-popers, and welcome back to Hallyu. This week we're going to take a look at how Japan factors into K-pop, including a bit of a primer on charting in Japan as a follow-up to the charting in K-pop deep dive I did a couple of weeks ago. We'll start by setting the stage and talking about why having success in Japan even matters for a K-pop group and why it can be risky. And then we'll talk about the big charting system in Japan, the Oricon charts. Finally, we'll round out our discussion with a fun look at some of the biggest successes K-pop artists have ever had in Japan, as well as just how big K-pop has become there in 2021. Before we get started, I want to quickly thank Hallyu's honorary producers. If you want to show off your bias group here, share your picks in weekly videos, and join a vibrant Discord community with watch parties, custom emoji, and more, all you need to do is support Hallyu on Patreon. So to start this off, let's talk a little bit about why K-pop groups try to make it big in Japan in the first place. After all, it does take a lot of work and energy just to make it big in their home country, let alone a second one. Well, it's the obvious answer, which is that being a superstar in Japan gives you more of everything. First off, you have exposure to millions more music fans who just might start to bias you in your music, which means even more album sales for both Japanese albums and even Korean ones. It also means a lot more opportunities to perform live and host fan events, and if you make it really big, you can even perform at the prestigious Tokyo Dome, a monstrous 55,000 seat stadium. And it's for those reasons that even in the early days of K-pop, making it big in Japan was a big focus. SM artists in the first and second generations put a lot of effort into this, perhaps most notably with BoA. As we'll see later on in the video, BoA had unprecedented success in Japan, and her sales records still stand to this day. She released her first Japanese album in 2002, and it would be her first of 6 consecutive #1 albums in Japan. In modern K-pop, becoming a million seller for an album is a huge feat that only just a couple of artists achieve each year, but BoA achieved that 19 years ago with that Japanese debut album, also doing so a second time with the follow-up album Valenti. TVXQ were also huge in Japan, earning their first #1 debut in January of 2008. That #1 song, Purple Line, was the boy group's 16th single in Japan already, showing just how much of a priority success in Japan really was. Kara is yet another group that saw mega success in Japan, and for a time, they were arguably bigger in Japan than they were in Korea. While their legendary comeback Step sold incredibly well in Korea with over 100,000 in sales, it pales in comparison to the Japanese album Supergirl they released just 10 weeks later. That album hit #1 on the charts and sold over 777,000 copies in Japan, dwarfing their Korean sales numbers. And like I was mentioning before, being big in Japan also boosts your Korean comebacks. In fact, that Step comeback made it all the way to #5 on Japanese charts despite being completely in Korean. And those are just a couple of examples, but almost every superstar group was active in Japan too. Girls' Generation, 2NE1, and Big Bang, just to name a few. And of course, promotion in Japan is still big today for our favorite artists, which we'll get to more in the final section of the video. But with all that being said, it is still a risk to try being successful in Japan in the first place, because it's not always a guarantee it'll work. As I talked about in my deep dive on Rainbow, you can find yourself in a precarious situation if it doesn't work out. That's because when you decide to promote in Japan, you're ignoring the fans in Korea that got you to that fame that you currently have in the first place. So in the case of Rainbow, spending 2 years promoting in Japan meant that when they came back, a lot of their fans had already moved on because they hadn't released any music in 2 years in Korea, and so they were never able to achieve that same success again. So now that we've got a good idea of why being a big group in Japan is so important, let's talk about the how, charting in Japan. Just a couple of weeks ago, I discussed charting in K-pop, and we saw how the Gaon music charts were publicly backed, making them the go-to official music charts in Korea. Well, in Japan, the situation's a little bit different, but also fairly similar to Korea, so let me explain. The Oricon music charts are the go-to source for tracking success of albums, digital singles, and more in Japan. And while Oricon's not backed by any sort of tourism industry like it is in Korea, the charts have been around for a long time. Oricon is actually short for Original Confidence, and it's a company that started publishing singles charts at the beginning of 1968, 53 whole years ago. As you can probably guess, back in 1968 it was a lot harder to have a reliable chart of national popularity, but today Oricon handles massive amounts of data to get the job done. By 2011, they were already compiling data from 39,700 different retail outlets, and that number has no doubt exploded in the last 10 years. So bottom line, Oricon is the charting provider when it comes to success for K-pop artists in Japan, and there's 2 charts in particular that are important, the singles chart and the albums chart. I'm hoping the names of those 2 charts are pretty self-explanatory, and the charts are released on a daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly basis. So whenever you hear me mention Oricon in a news video or other deep dive, that means we're talking specifically about Japanese sales only, whether it's for a digital single or a physical album. So now let's have some fun. Now that we know how charting works in Japan, let's talk about which K-pop artists have found the most success in Japan, because honestly, it's pretty amazing when you look at it. Why? Well, let's start with the list of million sellers and you'll soon find out. So to be clear, this is a list of the albums from a K-pop artist that has sold over 1 million copies in Japan. Believe it or not, this list is only 4 albums long. In the entire history of K-pop, only 4 albums have cleared 1 million sales in Japan. Those 4 albums are BoA's 2002 debut, Listen to My Heart, BoA's 2003 album, Valenti, BoA's 2005 compilation album, Best of Soul, and Girls' Generation's 2011 self-titled Japanese debut album. That's it. And to me, the fact that that list is so short is truly remarkable. Think of how much bigger K-pop continues to get every year, how much Twice, BTS, NCT, and others have dominated charts in Japan and Korea recently. And yet, none of them have hit that level of sales that BoA and Girls' Generation did in the past. It goes to show how huge these early artists really were, and that goes for Kara too, who like I mentioned nearly hit 800,000 sales themselves in 2011. But that's not to say that K-pop isn't big in Japan anymore, and to prove that it is still big, let's take a quick look at this year so far on the Oricon albums chart. As of the time of writing, there have been 28 charting weeks so far in 2021 on that albums chart. If you had to guess how many of those weeks had a #1 spot that was held by a K-pop album, what would you guess? Maybe a few from BTS, or maybe even 5 total if another artist had a hit album too? Well, the total is much higher actually. In 12 out of the first 28 weeks of this year, Oricon's album chart has been topped by a K-pop artist. 12 weeks? Think about that. For almost half of the year so far, Japan's national music chart has had a K-pop album at #1. And what's even more fascinating is that it's not just BTS. Take a look at the list of albums here. We've got multiple albums from NCT units, multiple albums from Tomorrow by Together, we've got Hypen, Treasure, and even Astro. Boy groups are enjoying huge success in Japan as K-pop continues to rise in popularity outside of Korea. And of course, I do feel obligated to mention a couple of girl groups too, because I'm sure there are 2 coming to mind immediately. First off is Twice, who have been very consistently active in Japan over the years, releasing both Japanese versions of songs and new original songs in Japanese, most recently of course with Perfect World. And while they haven't had the same million-seller success as the record holders Girls' Generation and BoA, they've still been pulling off some big numbers well into the hundreds of thousands of sales, and just about all their Japanese singles have done so. And of course there's IZ*ONE as well, the hybrid Japanese-Korean group formed out of Produce 48. IZ*ONE's actually a really interesting case because while they did see very strong success in Japan, along the same levels as Twice's singles, they actually did even better in Korea. In fact, their 2020 summer album, One Eric Diary, cleared 550,000 copies, more than doubling their highest total for a Japanese release. So, that was a lot of cool records, achievements, and sales totals. But what's the takeaway? Well, to me, it's that first of all, being successful in Japan gives our favorite K-pop groups the ability to launch even higher into superstardom. We have seen just how big those sales numbers can get in Japan. That's been the case going back nearly 20 years, starting with BoA, then going to groups like Girls' Generation, Kara, and now to Twice, IZ*ONE, BTS, and many others. And with K-pop continuing to flourish more and more every year, the Oricon charts will keep on reflecting that, with more and more weeks being topped by K-pop artists like NCT, Tomorrow by Together, BTS, Twice, and others. Does that mean that we'll see a K-pop artist achieve enough success to eventually break that million-seller barrier once again? Well, for that answer, we're just gonna have to wait and find out. So, how do you feel about artists promoting in Japan? Do you think that they put too much focus on it or not enough? I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are. As always, thank you so much for watching this deep dive, and if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss all the other K-pop content that's coming your way right here at Hallyu. This has been Deep Dive number 62, K-pop in Japan.